Captain Rhys Morgan had seen many things in his years drifting through space. Smugglers, fugitives, were criminals. But never had he encountered something quite like this. It started when he docked at an abandoned space station on the outskirts of the Kesari Nebula. His ship, the Odyssey, was running low on fuel, and the station, though officially out of service, still had automated supply depots he could tap into. A simple stop, in and out. But the moment he stepped back onto his ship, he knew something was wrong. A faint sound, a scuffle, barely noticeable. He moved cautiously, hand drifting to the blaster holstered at his side. The Odyssey wasn't just his ship, it was his home. And someone was trespassing. Rhys stalked toward the cockpit, scanning the dimly lit corridors. Then, out of nowhere, a figure lunged at him. Small, fast, desperate. He barely had time to react before something cold and metallic pressed against his neck. A stolen plasma cutter, humming with dangerous energy. "Step away," a voice hissed. His attacker was a girl. No, not entirely human. Her skin shimmered with a faint, iridescent glow, changing hues in the low light. Her eyes, large, filled with fear, locked onto his. She was shaking, but her grip on the plasma cutter was firm. Rhys raised his hands slowly. "Let's talk about this." She didn't move. He studied her face. Young, but not a child. There was something haunted in her expression, something more than just desperation. "What do you want?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "The ship," she said. "I need it." Rhys exhaled. "Look, if you're a thief." "I'm not," she snapped, and for the first time, her voice wavered. "I don't want to hurt you." But he could tell. She would if she had to. Then, in the distance, a distant, rhythmic beeping. She flinched, looked toward the cockpit. Rhys frowned. That sound, a proximity alert. Someone, or something, was coming. The girl's panic deepened. "They found me," she whispered. Rhys' gut twisted. He didn't know who they were, but judging by the terror in her eyes, it wasn't good. The station scanners flickered on the Odyssey's dashboard, and he caught a glimpse of an approaching vessel, heavily armed. No distress signals. No identification tags. This wasn't a coincidence. They were hunting her. Rhys made a split-second decision. He reached forward, fast, and yanked the plasma cutter from her grip. She gasped, stumbling back, but before she could react, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the cockpit. "Strap in," he ordered. "We're leaving." She blinked. "You're helping me?" He didn't answer. He just powered up the engines. Outside, the enemy ship was closing in. Whoever they weren't here to talk. The Odyssey burst from the docking bay just as plasma rounds rained down, scorching the abandoned station. Rhys pushed the thrusters to full power, weaving through debris, trying to outmaneuver their pursuers. "Who are they?" he demanded, gripping the controls. The girl was panting, her glowing skin flickering between shades of blue and violet. "They destroyed my planet," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the only one left." Rhys glanced at her. He'd heard stories, whispers of entire civilizations wiped out, casualties of wars no one talked about. But seeing the last survivor of an extinct race sitting in his co-pilot's chair, terrified and alone, that was different. The enemy ship was gaining on them, weapons priming. Rhys clenched his jaw. "Hang on." With a sudden jerk, he flipped the Odyssey into a sharp dive, skimming the outer edges of a nearby asteroid field. The enemy fired, a near miss. The shockwave rattled the hull, but Rhys didn't slow down. "Why are they after you?" he asked. The girl swallowed hard. "Because I know the truth." Rhys' grip tightened on the controls. "What truth?" She hesitated. Then, "The ones who destroyed my world. They're coming for yours next." A cold chill ran down Rhys' spine. He didn't know if he believed her. Didn't know if he wanted to believe her. But as the enemy ship closed in, as the weight of her words settled over him, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about survival. It was about stopping something bigger than either of them. And if she was telling the truth, the entire galaxy was in danger. Rhys didn't have time to process the weight of her words. The enemy ship was closing in, and his instincts screamed at him to move. He twisted the controls hard to the left, sending the Odyssey into a tight spiral through the asteroid field. Chunks of rock the size of buildings tumbled past, and he gritted his teeth as one nearly clipped the wing. The girl clung to the seat, her glowing fingers digging into the armrest. "They won't stop," she said, her voice strained. "Yeah, I figured that part out," Rhys muttered. He flicked the ship's scanner, pulling up a three-dimensional grid of their surroundings. His pursuers were faster, better armed, but they lacked one crucial thing: his recklessness. He spotted a cluster of asteroids ahead, their magnetic fields erratic and unpredictable. The kind of place a smart pilot avoided. Rhys aimed straight for it. "They won't follow us in there," he said. The girl's breath hitched. "Because it's a death trap. Only if you don't know what you're doing." The ship groaned as it dove into the chaos. Asteroids smashed against each other, sending smaller debris ricocheting in every direction. The enemy ship hesitated at the edge. Then, to Rhys' satisfaction, they veered off. He exhaled, loosening his grip on the controls. The Odyssey coasted through the field, dodging rock formations by inches. The girl sat in silence, her breathing still uneven. "Okay," Rhys said after a moment. "Start talking." She hesitated, then let out a slow breath. "My name is Iri," she said. "I was born on Vena 4. Rhys frowned. He knew that name. Or rather, he knew what had happened to it. Vena 4 was gone, wiped out a year ago in what was officially called an accident, but rumors said otherwise. "How did you survive?" he asked. Iri looked down, her fingers glowing a faint, sorrowful blue. "I shouldn't have." She told him how, on the night her world burned, she had been inside a research facility, deep underground, hidden from the chaos above. The bombardment came without warning. One moment, the planet thrived. The next, it was glassed into silence. She only survived because the facility collapsed at just the right angle, trapping her but not crushing her. By the time she clawed her way out, there was nothing left. "Everyone was gone," she whispered. "I searched for days. There was no one." Rhys felt a weight settle in his chest. He had seen war. He had seen planets fall. But hearing it from someone who had lived through it, a girl whose entire world had been erased, was different. "Who did it?" he asked. Iri's hands clenched into fists. "The Syndicate." Rhys stiffened. The Syndicate. The name alone sent a ripple of unease through him. A powerful, secretive faction with influence that stretched across entire star systems. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, they were responsible for some of the darkest events in galactic history. "And now they want you dead?" he asked. Iri nodded. "Because I found something they didn't want anyone to see." She reached into her tattered cloak and pulled out a small, metallic device. Rhys recognized it immediately, a data core. "What's on it?" "Proof," she said, "that the Syndicate is planning something bigger." That Vena 4 was just the beginning. Rhys' pulse quickened. If she was telling the truth, this wasn't just about revenge. This was about stopping a war before it even started. But getting involved with the Syndicate was suicide. If they were hunting her, they wouldn't stop. And now that he had helped her, he was a target too. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You're a lot of trouble. You know that?" Iri gave him a small, sad smile. "So I've been told." Rhys ran a hand through his hair. He had two choices. He could dump her at the nearest station, let her fend for herself, and go back to his quiet, unremarkable life. Or he could do the stupid thing, the thing that would probably get him killed. He looked at her, scared, alone, desperate for someone to believe her. "Damn it," Rhys groaned. "All right, kid. Let's go make some enemies." Iri's eyes widened. "You mean?" Yeah, don't make me say it." He flicked the ship's controls, setting a new course. "If we're going to take down the Syndicate, we're going to need help." And he knew exactly where to start. As the Odyssey shot out of the asteroid field and into the cold darkness of space, Rhys couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something far bigger than he'd ever imagined. Iri sat in stunned silence as Rhys locked in their next destination. The star map flickered on the screen, and a set of coordinates appeared. Coordinates that took them deep into outlaw territory. "Where are we going?" she asked. Rhys exhaled, tapping a few buttons on the console. "To see an old friend." A guy who hates me. But he also hates the Syndicate more. So that's something. IRI didn't press further. She clutched the data core tightly, as if afraid it might disappear. The hum of the ship settled into a steady rhythm, and for the first time since she'd stepped aboard, the tension eased, slightly. Rhys leaned back, studying her. Get some rest while you can. It's gonna be a long ride. IRI hesitated, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. Slowly, she curled up in the co-pilot's seat, her glowing skin dimming as sleep took her. Rhys turned his attention back to the ship's controls, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew what he was doing was reckless, maybe even suicidal. But something about IRI, her story, her fear, her determination, had struck a nerve. He wasn't the kind of guy who played hero. He didn't save people. But he also wasn't the kind of guy who let an entire civilization get wiped out without trying to stop it. The Syndicate had made a mistake. They should have finished the job when they destroyed Vena 4. Because now, Rhys was involved. And he wasn't planning on running. They dropped out of hyperspace near the edges of Vornis Prime, a lawless trade hub orbiting a dying red star. The place was a maze of floating markets, pirate hideouts, and underworld dealings. If you needed something illegal, or someone willing to do illegal things, this was where you went. IRI stirred as the ship rumbled to a stop in one of the station's docking bays. She blinked sleepily. We're here. Yeah, Rhys said, standing. Stick close to me. And whatever you do, don't make eye contact with anyone who looks like they want to kill you. IRI paled. That's not reassuring. It wasn't supposed to be. The airlock hissed open, and they stepped into the dimly lit station. The smell of burning fuel and stale alcohol clung to the air. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved around them. Hulking, armored Bracca mercenaries, slithering Scythery traders, humans with cybernetic implants flickering under their skin. Rhys led IRI through the crowded corridors, weaving past a group of bickering Cordith smugglers and a vendor selling what he really hoped wasn't actual human meat. At the far end of the station, they stopped in front of a heavily reinforced door. Rhys pressed the intercom. A crackling voice responded. Unless you've got a death wish, turn around and walk away. Rhys smirked. Nice to hear your voice too, Doran. Open up. Silence. Then a long sigh. The door slid open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of engine grease and old whiskey. Doran Vex, a former Syndicate pilot turned information broker, sat behind a cluttered desk, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly. His gaze flicked between Rhys and IRI. This better be good, he muttered. Rhys stepped forward. We need your help. Doran leaned back, crossing his arms. Last time I helped you, I ended up with a bounty on my head. Yeah, well, this time, it's bigger than both of us. Doran raised an eyebrow. That's so? IRI stepped forward, holding up the data core. The Syndicate wiped out my planet, she said. And they're coming for more. Doran's expression darkened. He reached for the data core, plugging it into a nearby terminal. A holographic display flickered to life, revealing classified Syndicate documents, blueprints for massive warships, lists of targeted planets, strategic deployment orders. Doran cursed under his breath. This is bad. Bad as in, we should run bad? Rhys asked. Bad as in, we're all already dead bad. The room fell into silence. Then Doran let out a sharp breath. All right, I'll help. But if we're going to stand a chance, we need more than just the three of us. Rhys nodded. Then we find a crew. IRI looked between them. And then, Rhys cracked a grin. Then we take the fight to the Syndicate. For the first time, IRI didn't look scared. She looked ready. The next few days were a blur of planning, bribing, and staying alive. Vornis Prime was the kind of place where secrets didn't stay hidden for long, and with the Syndicate hunting IRI, they couldn't afford to stay in one place too long. But before they could make a move against the most powerful organization in the galaxy, they needed a crew. Doran knew people, dangerous people, the kind of people who wouldn't flinch at the idea of going up against the Syndicate. But convincing them? That was another challenge entirely. The first recruit was Kale Dravik, a towering Bracca mercenary with dark red skin, for arms, and a reputation for ripping enemies apart with his bare hands. When Rhys and Doran found him, He was in the middle of a bar fight, holding two men by their throats while drinking from a stolen bottle with one of his other hands. Rhys leaned against the doorway. "We need muscle." Cale turned, dropping the two unconscious men to the floor. "Who are we killing?" Rhys smirked. "The Syndicate." Cale let out a deep, rumbling laugh. "You're insane." Then he grabbed his gear. "I'm in." Next was Vela Wren, an ex-Syndicate engineer turned weapons expert. She was holed up in a dingy workshop, modifying a plasma rifle that was definitely illegal in half the galaxy. "Let me guess," she said when Doran introduced them. "You want me to build you something that'll level a Syndicate outpost?" Rhys folded his arms. "No, we want you to help us take down the entire Syndicate." She stared at him, then grinned. Finally, something interesting. With each new recruit, their plan began to take shape. Ethos, a mysterious Sci-Fi hacker who could break through the Syndicate's encrypted networks. Rilo and Pex, a pair of twin pilots who could maneuver anything with wings. Dr. Selva, an ex-military medic with a grudge against the Syndicate as deep as a black hole. As the crew assembled aboard the Odyssey, IRI watched them with a mix of awe and uncertainty. These were outlaws, fugitives, people who had spent their lives running from the law. And yet, they had all agreed to fight for something bigger than themselves. She pulled Rhys aside. "Why are they helping us?" Rhys glanced at the crew. Cale sharpening a massive blade, Vela fine-tuning a bomb, Ethos muttering into a communicator. He met IRI's gaze. "Because the Syndicate took something from all of us." "And what did they take from you?" she asked. Rhys hesitated. Then, quietly, "My brother." IRI's eyes widened. He never talked about it. Not to anyone. But years ago, his younger brother had gotten involved with the Syndicate. When he tried to leave, they made an example out of him. Rhys had never forgiven himself for not saving him. Now, he had a chance to make things right. The crew worked fast. Ethos hacked into Syndicate communications, gathering intel. Vela rigged explosives. Cale stocked up on weapons. And then, finally, they had a target. The Syndicate's central data hub, a heavily guarded station orbiting a dead moon. It housed the organization's deepest secrets. If they could break in, they could expose everything. Every crime, every war, every planet they had destroyed. It was a suicide mission, but they were going anyway. The Odyssey dropped out of hyperspace, its engines humming as they approached the station. The plan was simple: get in, upload the data, get out. Except nothing ever went according to plan. The moment they breached the station's airlock, alarms blared. Syndicate enforcers poured into the corridors, weapons raised. Cale roared and charged forward, ripping through the guards like they were paper. Vela fired off a series of plasma rounds, taking out a security turret before it could lock onto them. Rhys and IRI sprinted toward the central control room. The Syndicate was already trying to wipe their systems, trying to erase any trace of their crimes. Ethos's voice crackled through the comms. "You've got 3 minutes before they shut everything down." Rhys kicked open the door to the control room. A Syndicate officer turned, reaching for his weapon. IRI raised her hand. For a split second, her entire body glowed, her skin shifting into a blinding white light. The officer staggered back, shielding his eyes. Just enough time for Rhys to knock him out cold. "You're full of surprises," Rhys muttered. IRI didn't answer. She just plugged the data core into the terminal and watched as the files flooded the Syndicate's network. 2 minutes, Ethos warned. Outside, the battle raged. Cale was bleeding but still fighting. Vela's explosives had taken out the station's defense turrets, but reinforcements were arriving fast. Rhys watched as the data spread. Every Syndicate secret, broadcasted across the galaxy. Every corrupt deal, every massacre, every shadow war. "This is it," IRI whispered. "This is how we end them." The station shuddered. "They're gonna blow the place." Doran's voice came through. "We need to leave. Now." Rhys grabbed IRI's hand and ran. They barely made it back to the Odyssey as explosions tore through the station. The ship's engines roared to life, and they shot into space just as the entire facility went up in flames. For a long moment, there was silence. Then Ethos let out a breathless laugh. "We did it. The whole Syndicate network is exposed. They can't cover this up." Across the galaxy, governments, resistance groups, and entire star systems saw the truth. The Syndicate wasn't invincible. They had made an enemy they couldn't erase. IRI sat back, staring out at the burning wreckage of the station. For the first time since she had lost her home, she didn't feel alone. Rhys looked at his crew, Kale nursing a wound, Vela grinning, Ethis already planning their next move. It wasn't over. The Syndicate would fight back. But for the first time, they weren't just running. They were fighting. And they weren't going to stop. Not until the galaxy was free.